Hey, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in here to Churchome. I am Judah and excited to share a story with you. Now, if you've turned this on, you may not know. It probably says part 4 somewhere on the screen. So, what that means is we are 4 kind of messages or talks in. If you go back to part 1 and you're like, Judah, I'm not watching all 3 of these leading up to 4. Okay, fair enough. But if you watch part 1, it'll give you more kind of historical context to a story that we're reading, which is approximately a couple thousand years old, but it is extraordinary. It's about a man, an infamous crook named Zacchaeus, who is befriended and loved by my hero, Jesus. And I think in a lot of ways, you and I can probably draw a lot of parallels in our own life to Zacchaeus. Now, maybe you're watching this and you're like, dude, I am not a crook, okay? I'm not a bad person. Fair enough. But the name Zacchaeus literally means pure or innocent. So we've titled kind of the whole collection of talks here as a return to innocence. What if that innocence, that sense of optimism and hope that you woke up with as a kid, maybe you're a person of faith and you remember days when you first met Jesus or first started to realize like God can do anything with my life. You remember those days you'd wake up and you're like, man, something awesome is going to happen today. If you're like me, life starts to happen. You get 46 and some pain is endured and some loss happens. And it's just easy to start every day with an attitude of like, all right, I'm kind of tired and let's get through the day. I think God's plan for you and for me is to have a sense of innocence and wonder. Innocence literally means the state of not being guilty. What if you lived your life without guilt? Honestly, imagine a daily life absent of guilt. What you'd expect, what you'd believe for, what you'd anticipate, what you'd think about, what you'd dream about, what you'd imagine if you had a life without guilt. I think this story is an incredible metaphor demonstration and a fact of what Jesus can do for you and me. And here's what I mean. What Jesus does for Zacchaeus, there's no doubt in my mind he can do for you. And what he does for Zacchaeus is wild, nothing short of scandalous. The story goes that Zacchaeus, an infamous crook, a Jewish man who robs his own people of their money through excessive taxation. He works in an ancient town called Jericho, which has much history in Scripture. And he has filled his pockets illegally, if you will. He's gotten in cahoots with Rome. Rome has said, hey, get our taxes, and if you want to add on more and fill your pockets, so be it. Zacchaeus is not just a tax collector. He's built a whole business, a whole downline, a whole entourage of tax collectors that answer to him, probably taking a percentage from the excessive taxation that they are imposing. He's a bad guy. He's an infamous guy. Nobody really likes him. And the Jews have rejected him as a proper Jew. He is not one of us, they have said. But he's heard about this character, this man, this extraordinary person named Jesus, whose teaching is unlike anyone, whose miracles are unprecedented. And perhaps he's the hope of the world. So Jesus comes through his town one day, and Zacchaeus thinks, I gotta get a glimpse of this guy. But Zacchaeus is a short guy. I've said this in some of the other sermons, but if you Google my height, they say it's 5'6". I am 6'1.5" to be exact. But let's move on. Zacchaeus is probably 5'6" or something like that. So he climbs a fig tree to see over the crowd so he can see Jesus. Something crazy happens. Jesus stops at the bottom of his fig tree and says, come on down. Right away, hurry. I want to go to your house. I want to go to your house. In fact, I got to go to your house. The crowd murmurs, the crowd gossips, the crowd talks. We talked about that last week. What do you do when people talk about you? How do you handle that? Boy, that can steal your innocence. That can steal your optimism and your hope. When you hear that people are gossiping and talking about you, it can be so deflating and discouraging. Jesus doesn't address it. They keep it moving, and they go back to Zacchaeus' house. And that's where we pick up what we're calling part 4 in this series. In Luke chapter 19 and verse 8, it says this: Zacchaeus joyously welcomed Jesus and was amazed over his gracious visit to his home. Zacchaeus stood in front of the Lord, in front of Jesus, and said, "Half of all that I own, I will give to the poor. And Lord, if I have cheated anyone, I promise to pay back 4 times as much as I have stolen." Wild. Jesus said, no doubt with a smile. He had to say this with a smile. "This shows that today life has come to you, Zacchaeus, and your household, for you're a true son of Abraham." Those were fighting words, by the way. He was a non-Jew, and now Jesus calls him a true Jew, a true son of Abraham. Son of Man has come to seek out and give life to those who are lost. To be fair, every sermon in this series I stand by, and it's been meaningful to me, and next week is going to be meaningful to me. But if I can say, part 4 is that message in the whole series. This is it. This is, to me, the climactic moment of the whole story, which is to say, all of the story leads to this moment. All of the story leads to what Jesus will communicate inside the home of Zacchaeus. He's going to send a message loud and clear. Now, already, the onlookers, the crowd, the murmuring, the gossiping, the talking has begun. And while Zacchaeus and Jesus walk shoulder to shoulder back to his house, people are already wondering what in the world is going on, because Jesus can't be a good man and be going to spend time in the home of a bad man. Can't be. And something extraordinary unfolds. To be fair, Luke chapter 19 and verse 8 is perhaps one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. Now, if you're a preacher like me, you got a lot of favorite verses, I must admit. But this verse for me, well, it kind of sums up why I'm with Jesus. And in a way, this verse is my story. And I hope maybe that this verse could be your story. This verse, for me, describes how Jesus works and what he'll do to your life and how he'll change everything. Whatever has led you to watching this content, whatever has led you to this moment, we're here now, you and me together. Let's sit here just for a moment. Perhaps in these moments, the way God met Zacchaeus, he'll meet you. The way God met me, he'll meet you. So let's go back to verse 8 and let me read this again, because this is the verse. See if you can pick up on what I'm seeing and feeling and sensing. It says again, Zacchaeus joyously welcomed Jesus and was amazed over his gracious visit to his home. That's the end of that sentence. And then it says, Zacchaeus stood in front of Jesus, which is said the Lord, which means Jesus is God. And Zacchaeus says this doesn't sound like a crook. This doesn't sound like a thief. He says, half of all that I own, I'll give to the poor. So far, he's saying, half of my wealth I'm going to give away. Zacchaeus has never acted like this, by the way. This is not why people hate him. They don't hate him because he gives his money away. They hate him because he steals their money. And Lord, if I have cheated anyone, and I'd like to respond to Zacchaeus by saying, you've cheated everyone. So everyone I've cheated, I promise to pay back 4 times as much as I stole. Okay, so in one verse, Zacchaeus has gone from very wealthy to giving everything away and perhaps going into debt. What in the world is going on with Zacchaeus? What's happened to this guy? This is wild. I mean, honestly, wait, where's the guy that everybody despises and hates? Where's the crook and the thug that has a group of crooks and thugs that also cheat people? And so by cheating all of these people, this group of people that probably, most likely, if I can paint the scene for you, verse 8 is probably like a scene from like a mob movie or a gangster movie. I envision like a long table, all of Zacchaeus' buddies, all of their partners and spouses and girlfriends and wives, wine flowing freely. I mean, it's a scene. This ain't PG-13. This is a rated R movie for sure, okay? Like, this is TV mature. Like, this is a scene from one of those old gangster movies. These guys are drinking, they're living it up, they're crude, they're crass. And out of nowhere, the leader, the godfather, if you will, stands up, wine in hand, dings the glass with his gold silverware, and says, I got something to say. Everybody gets real quiet because Zacchaeus is in charge. He's the reason they got money. He's the reason they live this lavish lifestyle. He's the guy. He's the man. Furthermore, we don't know how he did it, but old Zacchaeus got the hottest item in the game right now, and Jesus is at our table. And come to find out, Jesus isn't like some of those stuffy, stiff, religious synagogue teachers. He's bellied up to our table and he seems to be having a good time. Zacchaeus is our guy. Zacchaeus dings his glass, says, I got something to say. All the crooks and all the thugs and all the gangsters get real quiet. I imagine their girls got their arms through their arm, and everybody gets real quiet to hear what the big guy has to say. And he says the unthinkable. He says, half of all that I own, I'm going to give to the poor. To the poor? We rob the poor. We make people poor. Hold on, what? That's right. I'm giving it half of my wealth away. All of a sudden, this room has changed. Everybody around the table is like, wait, what? And then it seems that Zacchaeus looks right at Jesus and says, and Lord, doesn't call him Jesus, calls him God. Lord means God. Lord means God over everybody. He says, and God, if I've cheated anyone, I promise to pay back, looking right at Jesus, 4 times what I stole. Well, now, I mean, there's got to be an accountant there. There's got to be a money guy there. And immediately they're thinking, no, we can't do that. We can't afford that. That don't add up. Like, that's everything, Zacchaeus. That's literally everything. So here's the question I want to ask you. What has gotten into Zacchaeus? What has happened to this man? Because a few moments ago, maybe only a few hours ago, he was the crook everyone knew him to be. He had climbed a tree to see what he could see. You know, now I'm like quoting the old song, and he wanted to see Jesus. Some will argue you can read all the different writings and philosophers and theologians who pontificate about Zacchaeus, and they'll say his heart was already soft and he was already open to Jesus. Perhaps, but we don't know that. But we do know, by the time we get to verse 8, we got a dinner scene on our hands. You say, well, Judah, you don't know if it was at a dinner table. Yeah, but it kind of makes sense when I say it, right? Maybe it was after dinner, probably not before dinner. And here's my point. By the time Zacchaeus gets back to his house with Jesus, we don't know how long that walk was. I think minutes go by and hours go by. And Zacchaeus I think he's watching Jesus. I think he has questions of why Jesus would come to his house. I think he thinks it's kind of wild and odd and crazy and scandalous. But maybe, just maybe, the more he watches Jesus, the more his whole worldview shatters, breaks, changes. Maybe his head spins during dinner, and it ain't the wine. He just can't figure out why Jesus is the way he is at dinner, why he talks to his other gang members the way he talks to them. Perhaps Zacchaeus can't figure out why he makes such meaningful eye contact. For instance, in those days, you wouldn't even make eye contact with a reprobate like Zacchaeus. A social reject? You wouldn't even acknowledge him. There would have been businesses in the public marketplace that would not even have acknowledged Zacchaeus had he walked up to their booth at the market because he was a non-Jew, a non-person. He was, well and truly, unaccepted and rejected. And now he's got the most popular Jew in his home. And he's treating everybody with dignity and respect and love and care and deference. And maybe it's hard for him to even believe it. What's interesting to me is it occurs to me that Jesus is very clear in this scene. He is saying something very clear to Zacchaeus and perhaps to everybody in that home and at that dinner. Now you go, Judah, you don't know if he had friends over. Guys, if LeBron came to your house and told you you could invite whoever you wanted, you would invite everyone who would possibly have the ability to get to your house, frankly. Why? Because you got LeBron over and you want him to kind of meet LeBron. What a night. So I think undoubtedly Zacchaeus had all of his thugs over that night. And be like, yo, come meet the guy. Come meet the guy. He's at your house? He's at my house. You gotta come check it out. Word probably got out through his whole crew. Yo, we're going to Zach's house tonight. He's got him. Like, Jesus is there. And I think they all gathered. But here's, I think, the message Jesus was saying loud and clear. I love you. I love you. Do you love me? I love you. And you know what's crazy about verse 8? Jesus never says a word. You know what's crazy about verse 8? No action of Jesus is even described. And I've often asked, I've spent a lot of time thinking about these stories. These stories are what I talk about for my career. Almost 3 decades of my life has been dedicated to retelling these stories. Literally. It's kind of what I do. So I spent a lot of time thinking about verse 8. More than you probably realize, more than I probably realize. And I've asked myself questions of this verse. Why wouldn't we be given just a few words? You know, like if Jesus looked at the accountant for Zacchaeus and said, hey, I sure love you. That'd be cool, right? Or what if in verse 8, what was included was, and Jesus walked across the room and he hugged the number 2 guy for Zacchaeus. Or Zacchaeus' wife or girlfriend. No words are mentioned from Jesus. No actions are described from Jesus. The only thing we know for sure about Jesus in that home was that his presence and his essence were there, fully there. And friend, that alone changed Zacchaeus' life forever. In fact, I can prove it to you. Absolutely, categorically, fundamentally, literally, tangibly. I'm telling you, whatever Zacchaeus witnessed, experienced, and felt in his home that day, to him, it was so precious and so valuable that his response was, I'm going to give my whole career away. I'm going to give all my life away. I'm going to give all my money away. I don't know. That's interesting to me. That maybe, just maybe, if you felt the love of God like Zacchaeus felt the love of God, that it could change your life the same way. I got to tell you, I think it's changed my life in a pretty similar way. Money doesn't come close to Jesus. Stuff doesn't come close to Jesus. Health itself, even in my body, doesn't come close to Jesus. This life itself doesn't come close to Jesus. I'm going to tell you the truth. I think this life is a vapor. I think it's here today, gone tomorrow. I think you and I live forever. And I think we spend eternity with the love of our life. with the only one who has truly ever loved us unconditionally, and that's Jesus. I think Zacchaeus finally came home. I think Jesus came to his home, but what Zacchaeus didn't know is he was coming home, and I think he met him. I think your home is a person, and I think that person is Jesus. And I think when you encounter his presence and his essence, there's something deep inside of your soul that says, I'm home. This is me coming home. This is what I've searched for my whole life. This is why I robbed and stole. This is why I was cheating and lying. Because I thought if I made enough money, if I got enough respect, that my life would matter, that I would feel significant. And yet this 2,000-year-old story tells us the truth. 2,000 years later, you and me, we're just like Zacchaeus. We keep telling ourselves if we do big stuff, make big money, and become a big deal, life will matter. I'll be happier. I'll feel more secure. I'll be safer. I'll feel more what? More what? I don't know. I'm 46 enough to know all of that, nearly all of that, amounts to kind of a pile of nothing. Jesus says, what does it profit a human who gets everything there is to get down here? But in the process, you lose your soul, your essence, the eternal part of you. I think Zacchaeus came home that day. And I think nothing else mattered. To say it plainly, everything we're doing here at Churchome, every camera, every light, every word we write, every word we speak, pastor chat, guided prayers. My wife's writing a book on marriage. Our marriage is good because of her, so I highly recommend it. I'm writing a book with one of my therapists on bad thoughts. I hope you read that. But to be completely candid with you, all of this simply amounts to what I'm telling you right now. And ultimately, right, it comes down to, will you and I ever find home, if that makes sense? Where it's like we're all sojourners in this life, trying to find like safety, meaning, identity, fulfillment, contentment, satisfaction. And we search for it, some our whole life, in all kinds of things: jobs, people's opinions, stature, looks, health, followers. I mean, we'll try substances. We'll try all kinds of things. I know I have. But I promise you when I say this, I'm looking at this camera telling you that the only true home I have ever found is him. And that's as good as it gets for me. And if you said, Judah, what does that mean for you? I would describe it a lot like Luke 19 and verse 8. That there are times in my life where I can't tell you I was looking for him. I can't even tell you that I was trying to see him or fix myself with him. He just showed up in my life. Sometimes it's with friends, sometimes it's by myself, sometimes it's on stage talking about him. And all I can tell you is like, it's not that I hear words from him or I see actions from him. I just feel his presence and his essence. And something inside of me acts a lot like Zacchaeus. And the only response I can tell you is it feels like I would give everything um, for that. And maybe, just maybe, you've lived enough life to know that you've tried enough to know that it just kind of leaves you wanting and empty. And all I can tell you is the beautiful magic of that verse 8, I know can happen to you. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think the dream is that this content provides some of those moments that perhaps even right now you would be like, dude, I don't know what I'm feeling, but it feels like home. Um, you ever been around somebody so gracious and so kind that later that night you're talking to somebody, maybe your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your partner or your wife or your husband, and you're like, man, I had a good time last night. And they said, why? And maybe you said, because I felt so seen and I felt so loved. So-and-so so kind and gracious. That's what happens with Jesus, man. Is all of a sudden you're just like, man, I feel better. Why do you feel better? I just feel I felt seen, I felt loved, I felt forgiven, I felt accepted. That's what Jesus does. I don't got any more time to peddle religion and tradition or some of the arbitrary actions that we associate with holy living. That's fine and wonderful. That's all good. But ultimately, what you and I need is truth and love. Need to come home. And I think that's what happened to Zacchaeus that day, and I think that's what can happen to you today, is you can come home. And maybe that's why we named the church that, Churchome. But make no mistake, your home is not a building. Your home is not a career. Your home can't even be summarized in your name. Your home is Him. You were made for Him. And I pray that you'll meet Him in a real way. Because the message is loud and clear. From the oceans to the rivers, to the lakes, to the mountains, to the animals, to the universe, to the stars, the message is clear. I love you. That's what He's trying to tell you, is He loves you. You. Oh yeah, He loves everybody, but He loves you. And He's your home, and He's safe, and He'll forgive you. And all the stupid, dumb stuff you've done can be forgiven in a moment in His presence and in His essence. And that's who He is. Can I pray for you? God, I sense your presence here. And it's wild to think, I mean, just hard to ascertain, that the same presence in Zacchaeus' home is the same presence I feel in the studio right now. That is wild. And I'm asking that you would show up in the homes of my friends watching right now, with your sweet, wonderful, forgiving, accepting, protecting, covering presence. And that maybe, just maybe, you would change our life forever, just like you changed Zacchaeus. Give us the innocence that only you can provide. I thank you for that. Amen. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing these moments with me. And next week, we'll close out this series. We'll do part 5. Thanks for watching.
And I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. In all my days, I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend.